I waved my hands to get everyone's attention. "It's late," I said. "We have to get into position." Fela nodded. "I want to be there early just in case." She straightened her gloves nervously. "Wish me luck." Mola walked over and gave her a quick hug. "It'll be fine. Stay somewhere public with him. He'll behave better if people are watching." "Keep asking him about his poetry," Devi advised. "He'll talk the time away. If he gets impatient, compliment the wine," Mola added. "Say things like, 'Oh, I'd love another glass, but I'm worried it'll go right to my head.' He'll buy a bottle and try and pour it into you." Devi nodded. "It'll keep him off you for an extra half an hour at least." She reached out and pulled up the top of Fela's dress a bit. "Start conservative, then bring them out a little more toward the end of the dinner. Lean, use your shoulders. If he keeps seeing more and more, he'll think he's getting somewhere. It'll keep him from getting grabby." "This is the most terrifying thing I've ever seen," Willem said quietly. "Do all the women in the world secretly know each other?" Sim asked. "Because that would explain a lot." "There's barely 100 of us in the Arcanum," Devi said scathingly. "They confine us to a single wing of the Muse whether or not we actually want to live there. How can we not know each other?" I walked over to Fela and handed her a slender oak twig. "I'll signal you when we're done. You signal me if he walks out on you." Fela arched an eyebrow. "A woman could take that slidingly?" she said, then smiled and slid the twig inside one of her long black gloves. Her earrings swung and caught the light again. They were emeralds, smooth emerald teardrops. "Those are lovely earrings," I said to Devi. "Where did you come by them?" Her eyes narrowed as if she were trying to decide whether or not to take offense. "A pretty young boy used them to settle his debt," she said. "Not that it's any of your business." I shrugged. "Just curious." Fela waved and walked off, but before she made it 10 feet, Simon caught up with her. He smiled awkwardly, talking and making a few emphatic gestures before handing her something. She smiled and tucked it into her long black glove. I turned to Devi. "I assume you know the plan?" She nodded. "How far is it to his room?" "A little more than half a mile," I said apologetically. "The slippage—" Devi cut me off with a gesture. "I do my own calculations," she said sharply. "Right." I gestured to where my travel sack lay near the edge of the fire pit. "There's wax and clay in there." I handed her a slim birch twig. "I'll signal you when we're in position. Start with the wax, give it a hard half hour, then signal and move on to the clay. Give the clay at least an hour." Devi snorted. "Huh, with a bonfire behind me? It'll take me 15 minutes, tops." "It might not be tucked into his sock drawer, you realize. It might be locked away without much air." Devi waved me away. "I know my business." I made a half bow. "I leave it in your capable hands." "That's it?" Mola demanded indignantly. "You lectured me for an hour. You quizzed me." "There isn't time," I said simply, "and you'll be here to coach her if need be. Besides, Devi happens to be one of the handful of people I suspect might be a better sympathist than me." Devi gave me a dark look. "Suspect? I beat you like a red-headed stepchild. You were my little sympathy hand puppet." "That was 2 span ago," I said. "I've learnt a lot since then." "Hand puppet?" Sim asked Willem. Will made an explanatory gesture, and they both burst out laughing. I motioned to Willem. "Let's go." Before we could head out, Sim handed me a small jar. I gave it an odd look. I already had his alchemical concoction tucked away in my cloak. "What's this?" "It's just ointment in case you get burned," he explained. "But if you mix it with piss, it turns into candy." Sim's expression was deadpan. "Delicious candy." I nodded seriously. "Yes, sir." Mola stared in confusion. Devi pointedly ignored us and began piling wood on the fire. An hour later, Willem and I were playing cards at the Golden Pony. The common room was nearly full, and a harpist was doing a passable version of Sweet Winter Rye. The room was full of murmured conversation as wealthy customers gambled, drank, and talked about whatever rich people talk about, how to properly beat the stable boy, I guessed, or techniques for chasing the chambermaid around the estate. The Golden Pony was not my sort of place. The clientele was too well-bred, the drinks too expensive, and the musicians more pleasing to the eye than the ear. Despite all this, I'd been coming here for nearly 2 span, making a show of trying to climb the social ladder. That way no one could say it was odd I was here on this particular night. Willem took a drink and shuffled the cards. My own drink sat half-finished and warm. It was only a simple ale, but given the prices at the Pony, I was now quite literally penniless. Will dealt another hand of breath. I picked up my cards carefully, as Simon's alchemical concoction made my fingers ever so slightly sticky. We might as well have been playing with blank cards. I drew and threw randomly, pretending to concentrate on the game when really I was waiting, listening. I felt a slight tickle in the corner of my eye, and reached to rub it away with my fingers, catching myself at the last second with my hand upraised. Willem stared at me from across the table, his eyes alarmed, and gave his head a small, firm shake. I went motionless for a moment, then slowly lowered my hand. I was so busy trying to appear nonchalant that when the cry came from outside, I was actually startled. It cut through the low murmur of conversation as only a shrill voice filled with panic can. "Fire! Fire!" Everyone in the Pony froze for a moment. This always happens when people are startled and confused. They take a second to look around, smell the air, and think things like, "Did he just say fire?" Or, "Fire? Where? Here?" I didn't hesitate. I leapt to my feet and made a show of looking around wildly, obviously trying to search out the fire. By the time everyone else in the common room started to move, I was already dashing for the stairs. "Fire!" the cries continued from outside. "Oh God, fire!" I smiled as I listened to Basil overact his small part. I didn't know him well enough to let him in on the whole plan, but it was vital that someone noticed the fire early so I could spring into action. The last thing I wanted to do was accidentally burn down half the inn. I reached the top of the steps and looked around the upper floor of the Golden Pony. There were already footsteps pounding up the stairs behind me. A few wealthy lodgers opened their doors, peering into the hallway. There were faint wisps of smoke curling underneath the door to Ambrose's rooms. Perfect. "I think it's over here!" I shouted, sliding a hand into one of my cloak's pockets as I ran to the door. In the long days we spent searching the archives, I'd found reference to a great many interesting pieces of artificery. One of them was an elegant piece of artificery called a siege stone. It worked on the most basic sympathetic principles. A crossbow stores energy and uses it to shoot a bolt a long distance at a great speed. A siege stone was an inscribed piece of lead that stores energy and uses it to move itself about 6 inches with the force of a battering ram. Reaching the middle of the hallway, I braced myself and charged Ambrose's door with my shoulder. I also struck it with the siege stone I held concealed against the flat of my hand. The thick timbered door staved in like a barrel struck by an anvil hammer. There were startled gasps and exclamations from everyone in the hallway. I rushed inside, trying desperately to keep the manic grin off my face. Ambrose's sitting room was dark, and made darker by a haze of smoke in the air. I saw flickering firelight inside, off to the left. From my previous visit, I knew it was his bedroom. "Hello!" I shouted. "Is everyone all right?" I pitched my voice carefully. Bold but concerned. No panic, of course. I was, after all, the hero of this scene. Smoke was thick in the bedroom, catching the orange firelight and stinging my eyes. There was a massive wooden chest of drawers against the wall, as big as a workbench in the fishery. Flames licked and flickered around the edges of the drawers. Apparently Ambrose had been keeping the mommet in his sock drawer. I picked up a nearby chair and used it to smash the window I'd climbed through several nights ago. "Clear the street!" I shouted down. The bottommost left drawer seemed to be burning the hottest, and when I pulled it open, the smouldering clothes inside caught the air hungrily and burst into flame. I smelled burning hair and hoped I hadn't lost my eyebrows. I didn't want to spend the next month looking constantly surprised. After the initial flare-up, I drew a deep breath, stepped forward and pulled the heavy wooden drawer free of the bureau with my bare hands. It was full of smouldering, blackened cloth, but as I ran to the window, I could hear something hard in the bottom of the drawer rattling against the wood. It tumbled as I threw it out of the window, clothes bursting into flame as the wind caught them. Next, I yanked out the top right-hand drawer. As soon as I pulled it free, smoke and flame poured out in an almost solid mass. With these 2 drawers gone, all the empty space inside the bureau formed a crude chimney, giving the fire all the air it wanted. As I heaved the 2nd drawer out of the window, I could actually hear the hollow rush of fire spreading through the varnished wood and the clothes inside. Down in the street, people drawn by the commotion were doing their best to put out the flaming debris. In the middle of the small crowd, Simon stomped about in his new hobnailed boots, smashing things to flinders like a boy splashing in puddles after the first spring rain. Even if the Mommet had survived the fall, it wouldn't survive that. This was more than mere pettiness. Debbie had signalled me 20 minutes ago, letting me know she'd already tried the wax Mommet. Since there had been no result, it meant Ambrose had undoubtedly used my blood to make a clay Mommet of me. A simple fire wasn't going to destroy it. One by one, I grabbed the other drawers and threw them into the street as well, pausing to pull down the thick velvet curtains around Ambrose's bed to shield my hands from the heat of the fire. This also might seem petty, but it wasn't. I was terrified of burning my hands. Every talent I had revolved around them. Petty was when I kicked the chamber pot on my way back to the bureau. It was the expensive kind, fine glazed pottery. It tipped over and rolled crazily across the floor until it struck the hearth and shattered. Suffice to say that what spilled across Ambrose's rugs was not delicious candy. Flame flickered openly in the spaces where the drawers had been, lighting the room while the broken window let in some clear air. Eventually, someone else was brave enough to make their way into the room. He used one of the blankets off Ambrose's bed to protect his hands and helped me throw the last several burning drawers out of the window. It was hot, sooty work, and even with the help, I was coughing by the time the last of the drawers went tumbling onto the street. It was over in less than 3 minutes. A few quick-thinking bar patrons brought in pitchers of water and doused the still-burning frame of the empty bureau. I tossed the smouldering velvet drapes out of the window, shouting, "Look out down there!" so Simon would know to retrieve my siege stone from the pile of tangled cloth. Lamps were lit and the smoke thinned as cool night air blew in through the broken window. People filtered into the room to help or gawk or gossip. A cluster of amazed onlookers gathered around Ambrose's staved-in door, and I idly wondered what sort of rumours might spring out of tonight's performance. Once the room was properly lit, I marvelled at the damage the fire had done. The chest of drawers was little more than a collection of charred sticks, and the plaster wall behind it was cracked and blistered from the heat. The white ceiling was painted with a wide fan of black soot. I caught my reflection in the dressing-room mirror and was pleased to see my eyebrows were more or less intact. I was mightily dishevelled, my hair in disarray and my face smudged with sweat and dark ash. The whites of my eyes looked very bright against the black of my face. Willem joined me and helped bandage up my left hand. It wasn't really burned, but I knew it would look odd if I walked away entirely unscathed. Aside from a little lost hair, my worst injury was actually the holes charred in my long sleeves. Another shirt ruined. If this kept up, I'd be naked by the end of the term. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched as people brought more water to splash on the bureau. I pointed out a charred ceiling beam and they doused it too, sending up a sharp hiss and a cloud of steam and smoke. People continued to wander in and out, looking at the wreckage and muttering to each other while shaking their heads. Just as Will was finishing my bandage, the sound of galloping hooves on cobblestones came through the broken window, temporarily overwhelming the noise of fiercely stomping hobnailed boots. Less than a minute later, I heard Ambrose in the hallway. "What in the name of God is going on here? Get out! Out!" Cursing and shoving people aside, Ambrose made his entrance. When he saw me sitting on his bed, he pulled up short. "What are you doing in my rooms?" he demanded. "What?" I asked, then looked around. "These are your rooms?" Keeping the proper amount of dismay in my tone wasn't easy, as my voice was rough with smoke. "I just burned myself saving your things?" Ambrose's eyes narrowed, then went to the charred wreckage of his bureau. His eyes flicked back to me, then went wide with sudden realization. I fought the urge to grin. "Get out of here, you filthy, thieving roo!" he spat venomously. "I swear if anything's missing, I'll bring the constable down on you. I'll have you on the iron law and see you hanged." I drew a breath to respond, then started to cough uncontrollably, and had to settle for glaring at him. "Good job, Ambrose," Willem said sarcastically. "You caught him. He stole your fire." One of the onlookers chimed in. "Yeah, make him put it back." "Get out!" Ambrose shouted, red-faced and furious. "And take that filthy shame with you, or I'll give you both the thrashing you deserve." I watched the bystanders stare at Ambrose, appalled by his behavior. I gave him a long, proud look, playing the scene for all it was worth. "You're welcome," I said with injured dignity, and shouldered past him, jostling him roughly out of the way. As I was leaving, a fat, florid man in a waistcoat staggered through the ruined door to Ambrose's rooms. I recognized him as the owner of the Golden Pony. "What the devil's been going on here?" he demanded. "Candles are dangerous things," I said. I looked over my shoulder and met Ambrose's eye. "Honestly, boy," I said to him, "I don't know what you were thinking. You'd think a member of the Arcanum would have more sense." Will, Mola, Devi, and I were sitting around what was left of the bonfire when we heard the crackle of footsteps coming through the trees. Fela was still dressed elegantly, but her hair was unpinned. Sim was making his way carefully alongside her, absent-mindedly holding branches out of her way as they moved through the undergrowth. "And just where have you two been?" Devi asked. "I had to walk back from Imre," Fela explained. "Sim came to meet me halfway. Don't worry, Mother, he was a perfect gentleman." "I hope it wasn't too bad for you," I said. "Dinner was about what you would expect," Fela admitted, "but the second part made it all worthwhile." "Second part?" Mola asked. "On our way back, Sim took me to see the wreckage at the pony. I stopped to have a word with Ambrose. I've never had so much fun." Fela's smile was wicked. "I was perfectly huffy." "She was," Simon said. "It was brilliant." Fela faced Sim and set her hands on her hips. "Run off on me, will you?" Sim screwed his face up into an exaggerated scowl and gestured wildly. "Listen to me, you daft bint," he said in a fair imitation of Ambrose's vintage accent. "My rooms are on fire." Fela turned away, throwing up her hands. "Don't lie to me. You ran off to be with some whore. I've never been so humiliated in my life. I never want to see you again." We applauded. Fela and Sim linked arms and took a bow. "In the interest of pure accuracy," Fela said in an offhand way, "Ambrose didn't use the words daft bent." She didn't let go of Sim's arm. Simon looked a little embarrassed. "Yes, well, there are some things you don't call a lady even in fun." He reluctantly let go of Fela and sat on the trunk of the fallen tree. Fela sat next to him. Fela leaned close to him and whispered something. Sim laughed, shaking his head. "Please?" Fela asked, laying her hand on his arm. "Quoth doesn't have his loot. Someone has to entertain us." Okay, Simon said, obviously a little flustered. He closed his eyes for a moment, then spoke in a sonorous voice. "Fast came our Fela, fiery eyes flashing, crossing the cobbles, strength in her stride. Came she to Ambrose, all ashes around him, grim was his gazing, fearsome his frown. Still Fela feared not, brave was her bu'er." Simon came to an abrupt stop before saying the word bosom and blushed red as a beet. Devi gave an earthy chuckle from where she sat on the other side of the fire. Ever the good friend, Willem stepped in with a distracting question. "What is that pause you keep doing?" he asked. "It's like you can't catch your breath." "I asked that too," Fela said, smiling. "It's something they use in Eldvintic verse," Sim explained. "It's a break in the line called a caesura." "You are dangerously well informed about poetry, Sim," I said. "I'm close to losing respect for you." "Hush," Fela said. "I think it's lovely. You're just jealous he can do it off the cuff." Poetry is a song without music, I said loftily. A song without music is like a body without a soul. Willem raised his hand before Simon could respond. Before we become mired in philosophical talk, I have a confession to make, Willem said somberly. I dropped a poem in the hallway outside Ambrose's rooms. It was an acrostic that spoke of his powerful affection for Master Hemme. We all laughed, but Simon seemed to find it particularly funny. It took him a long while to catch his breath. It couldn't be more perfect if we planned it, he said. I bought a few pieces of women's clothing and scattered them in with what was out on the street, red satin, lacy bits, a whalebone corset. There was more laughter. Then they turned their eyes to me. And what did you do? Debbie prompted. Only what I set out to, I said somberly. Only what was necessary to destroy the Mommet so I could sleep safe at night. You kicked over his chamber pot, Willem said. True, I admitted. And I found this. I held up a piece of paper. If that's one of his poems, Davy said, I'd suggest you burn it quickly and wash your hands. I unfolded the slip of paper and read it aloud. Ledger mark 4535, ring, white gold, blue smokestone, remount setting and polish. I folded it carefully and put it in a pocket. To me, I said, this is better than a poem. Sim sat upright. Is that a pawn slip for your lady's ring? It's a claim slip for a jeweller, if I don't miss my guess. But yes, it's for her ring, I said. And she's not my lady, by the by. I'm lost, Davy said. That's how all this started, Willem said. Quoth was trying to reclaim a bit of property for a girl he fancies. Someone should fill me in, Davy said. I seem to have come in halfway through the story. I leaned back against a piece of fieldstone, content to let my friends tell the story. The slip of paper hadn't been in Ambrose's chest of drawers. It hadn't been on the hearth or his bedside table. It hadn't been on his jewellery tray or his writing desk. It had, in fact, been in Ambrose's purse. I'd lifted it off him in a fit of pique half a minute after he called me a filthy, thieving roo. It had almost been a reflex action as I'd brushed roughly past him on my way out of his rooms at the Pony. By strange coincidence, the purse also contained money, almost 6 talents. Not a great deal of coin as far as Ambrose was concerned. Enough for an extravagant night out with a lady. But for me, it was a great deal of money. So much I almost felt guilty for taking it. Almost.